Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our journey, our discussions, our explorations, and our discoveries with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion Collection during this year of 2021. That brings us to that title, which has been designated by Criterion at Spy Number 1102. This is a film from 1960. The filmmaker is Satyajit Ray, and the name of the work is DEVI. This is the work from 1960, and this is from the world-renowned, brilliant filmmaker and artist Satyajit Ray, and it is based upon the story by Prabhat Kumar Mukhopadhyay, inspired by the idea by Rabindranath Tagore. And this film has in its incredible cast people like Chobi Bishash and Soumitra Chatterjee and Sharmila Tagore and others. This is the extraordinary, haunting, compelling, captivating, and thought-provoking work, which is DEVI. The plot or story of DEVI focuses in primarily on this particular household in a rural part of India during the 19th century, specifically the latter half of the 19th century. And this particular household has at the head the patriarch, who is Kalikinkar. This is the Chobi Bishash character, or the character portrayed by Chobi Bishash. And in this particular household, well, first of all, we can see almost immediately that this is a wealthy household in terms of the size of the household, in terms of the ornate nature of the decorations inside, in terms of the servant class that is also part of this particular household, etc. Again, at the head, we have the patriarch figure, the elderly father figure. And included in this particular household, too, are the sons of the elderly father figure. One of those sons being the character of Uma Prasad, who is played by or portrayed by Soumitra Chatterjee. And Uma is married to the young woman Doya Moy, or Doya, and Doya is portrayed by Sharmila Tagore. And so this is a young, newly married couple, and again, they live in the household. Also living in the household is another son and his family, included in which is the young boy Koka. So Koka is therefore the nephew of the Uma and Doya couple. And so we have this large family of sorts living under the head of the household, so to speak, the Kalikinkar elderly father figure patriarch, again in this rural setting of India. So this is the setup or backdrop of this particular story, and as it gets going, it really gets going, and there are a lot of things happening almost simultaneously, thus making it incredibly enriching and complex viewing experience. So what are these things that are going on? So first off, we have the idea of the son, Uma, who is again married to Doya, but also he is seeking his education outside of the household, and so he goes away to Kolkata. And here, this is an aspect of the film which is, therefore, he seems to be representing a type of younger generation that is seeking their education in the cities, and therefore this is representing a type of emergence of an intellectual, educated class that is also seemingly representing a sense of emergence of the idea of modern rational thought, or type of renaissance that comes into a collision with the older generation, quote-unquote, traditional values as represented by, for instance, the elderly father figure, patriarch, the Shubibisha's character, and his roots in terms of his wealth, his landed wealth, in the context of a type of wealthy, landed, feudal class, or feudal-based structure or situation. And so we have, therefore, the emergence of this intellectual, educated class on the one hand, the younger generation, as it were, as well as the older generations that is already established in terms of their authority and control and finance and wealth. So this is, I think, already a dynamic that is shaped up. And this will lead to a particular set of maybe confrontations or dramatic situations that are, again, embodied within the context specifically of the story of Devi. So that's one important thing to keep in mind, I would say. The other important thing to keep in mind, of course, is the notion of religion. And to be specific here, the notion of religion and the beauty and the sincere faith that is expressed in terms of how important religion is to many of the characters in this film. So religion as a type of guidance, or a type of inspiration, or set of feelings or principles that inspire one on the one hand in a very optimistic and positive way. Then on the other side of the coin is the idea of a type of maybe strict dogmatic, institutionalized form of religion, is embodied by, say, externalized pressures of the community that might then maybe usurp or otherwise corrupt, or perhaps even blind one from seeing the true nature of a particular dramatic situation. And so the sort of positive aspects of religion are writ large on the one hand, but on the other side of that coin is the discussion or exploration of the possible not just side effects, but the possible consequences that could arise due to a hyper-realized and established, or an intensely established sense of an institutionalized religious view. So there are these two sides of the same or similar type of coin that is also, I think, at the heart of this particular work, Devi. And there are a number of other themes that emerge, and we'll perhaps talk about those when we just touch upon those when we speak more about the supplements of this particular Criterion release, and it's really key discussion. So we'll save that for a little bit later in this video discussion. But for now, I would say that these seem to be the two, or one of the two, or two of the among the fundamental themes that are at play in Devi. And indeed, they form the basis of the propulsion forward of the plot, because we understand too that the patriarch, the elderly father figure, he clings to this idea of a type of faith in religion up to a point that when he one night has a dream that he sees in his dream vision, that he believes that his young daughter-in-law, the character of Doya, after he wakes up from this dream, he begins to believe, or he strongly therefore believes, that Doya, the young woman, is a human incarnation of the Devi, mother goddess, this idea of incarnation, Shakti incarnation. There are many incarnations like Durga, or the incarnation from incarnations, Durga, Kali, and others. And so the religious principles also relate to, I think directly in terms of the specific plot of Devi, this relates to, again, the dream sequence, the very famous dream sequence here in Devi that leads the Kali Kinkar character to believe that Doya is indeed a human incarnation of the mother goddess. And this happens while the son is away, while the husband is away. And when this happens, nothing will shake the elderly father from such belief. And this leads the plot forward to its type of inexorable conclusion. So along the way, we see all the changes that occur when we see, for instance, the changes within the household. Doya is suddenly being treated with very special care, to the point of leading to a type of very almost cold isolation from the rest of the people in the immediate circle of this family household, including her young nephew or nephew-in-law, her young nephew, the Koka character, with whom she has a very, very close and intimate relationship. And so that becomes stripped from her, or she no longer can enjoy the wonderful intimate nature, the closeness of that relationship, because she is limited in terms of who she can meet within the household. It also has ramifications outside this particular household, within the context of this particular rural community, because very soon we see that people from outside the household, people from parts of the community, come to this particular house, and they believe in the belief that she is indeed the human incarnation of the Mother Goddess, such that they wish to be blessed by her by, for instance, being in her physical presence, maybe drinking what they believe is holy water, which is water that she has physically interacted with in some form, and thus perhaps hoping that they can be blessed, they can be cured, or they can experience some kind of miracle, which is a religious-based miracle. And indeed, there are some circumstances or situations that lead certain characters to believe that, in fact, certain miracles are being performed because, yes, she is indeed the human incarnation of the Mother Goddess. And so this leads the plot further and further down this particular line of thinking, as well as thematic development, such that we then get these particular dramatic clashes between, as I was mentioning earlier, the emergence of an sort of intelligentsia class, or the educated class of the younger generation. Again, the son Uma, the husband Uma, and his attempts at trying to establish or try to rationalize this particular situation, while at the same time we have the elderly father figure still intensely clinging to this belief that is religiously based. And so there is already this clash between the younger generation and the older generation, as exemplified by father and son relationship, which is also is a metaphor for the kind of clash between the landed wealthy class, the feudal landed wealthy class on the one hand, and the younger emerging Reformation spirit, Renaissance of the latter half of the 19th century India. And so there's also that clash as well. And in the very heart of this particular clash or confrontation is the heart and soul of this young woman, Doya. And we see as I say, the metaphorical struggles or battles that are taking place with her at the very center of this. Also, indeed, we see the psychological and emotional toll and effect this is having on many characters, including Doya herself. And there are moments where perhaps she begins to, well, first of all, we see the psychological impact of, say, the isolation that she is experiencing within the household itself. We also see a sense of a type of maybe confusion, as well as resignation that she seems to be feeling when she is encountering other members of the community who are traveling all the way to see her because of their belief that she is indeed this divine figure who can perform miracles of some sort. And also we see her struggle with who she thinks or how she views herself in terms of her own sense of self-worth and self-importance, or her place, or how she views her place and her role in this household, vis-a-vis her father-in-law, vis-a-vis her husband, and vis-a-vis herself, and vis-a-vis the community around her. And this also has, I think, a lot to do with the examination, exploration of gender roles in society in this particular point in time. And this is a point that is very nuanced. It's quite delicate and nuanced, and it's brought up, I think, with such skill and expertise in one of the supplements, and again we'll talk about that in the latter half of this video discussion. But this is suffice to say, let me just say here on a very general level that we have so many aspects of this film that are operating at the same time in an intense way, in this really compelling way, and the consequences are the psychological and emotional, landscapes of the human spirit that are embodied by each of these characters, Doya and Uma and Kalikinkar and others, and Koka and others, and then when we see those consequences reach a certain fervor and a certain intense point, and in fact it could be said to go beyond certain points of intensity, we understand indeed that this battle, this sort of metaphorical battle between various poles, between various sides of that is related at its very heart with the idea of sort of struggle over the idea of the identity of soul, the history of India, as well as the identity and soul of the idea of religion, and not just religion but also religious dogmatism in this particular mode of human existence. And it's also this idea of a metaphorical battle between sort of older generation and younger generations. But it certainly becomes also a harsh reminder that we might have these metaphorical battles, or we might have these sort of ideological and societal struggles that are at the heart and center, or that are being represented by the plot developments of Devi. But what Devi also reminds us too is the harshness and the sort of cruelness and the type of dire straits considerations that one is confronted with when you take these particular themes and considerations to their very limit. And that limit means life or death. So this is incredibly compelling, because always at the very heart and soul of these particular ideological discussions, embedded in the story, is the effects on the human condition as expressed by these characters that we come to know so well and so intimately, and early on we already become to care for them, and each in their own way, we as viewers begin to sympathize with them, and we support them, and we love them, and we want to see them well, and we wish them well. But as the film develops, we realize, perhaps all too quickly, that it is a very complex situation indeed, where a lot is in fact at stake. So this is an incredibly awe-inspiring and compelling and very powerful work indeed, that is, as I say, very multi-layered and very complex. And so I don't claim to be in any way an expert in sort of history and religion in this particular aspect, but at the very least, the Criterion release here, I think, is very helpful in this regard to show that this is a very complex work indeed that is delivered with a sense of panache and style and visual flair from Satyajit Ray. I mean, there are some really powerful moments, for instance, close-ups on faces, the use of dialogue versus the use of silence, the way in which feelings of a very deep and tender and personal nature are conveyed without words being spoken on screen. And it's so, it's not just economical, it's very poetic as well. And these little details too that emerge, for instance, this idea of the emergence of a young educated class that seems to be in collision course with the older generation, but at the same time there's this complex nature of the dependence of the younger generation on the older generation, because the older generation has money and the younger generation does not. And this is exemplified too by one of the exchanges with one of the friends of Uma, who's also a young man who's trying to be educated but wants to marry a widow. And this is considered to be a societal, this is something that is against societal mores that the older generations seem to be espousing, such as this young friend of of Uma says, if he were to ever consider to marry a widow, then that would mean, in his words, total disinheritance. And so there is already embedded within this film, as I say, this type of metaphorical and ideological struggle. But it's not just that. It is actually very complex and very nuanced indeed. And so there is a struggle, but there's also an interdependence. There's this idea, too, in terms of the concept of gender roles. There's this idea, too, of the role of women, on the one hand, that seems to be supported by this notion of the educated emergence, the emergence of the educated class, which is representing a sense of quote-unquote modernity and the Renaissance of 19th century, latter half of 19th century India on the one hand, which might bring with it a sense of gender roles and independence on the one hand, but then question whether indeed those principles are in fact being espoused by the characters in this film Devi, or maybe there is actually something more nuanced going on with this particular type of discussion. And again, let us continue this point when we get to the Criterion supplements, because it really addresses this point so well and so thoroughly and so compellingly. So there is that. Also, there is the notion, as I say, of the treatment of religion, and how this is often regarded as being Satyajit Ray's, it's described as a type of political film. It's also described as being a harsh critique of the concept of institutionalized religion, and how it's applied and how it seems to be very much against notions of intellectual rationalism. And but at the same time, it is not necessarily maybe to be taken as a critique of religion as a whole. There's no, it's not as this. It's a film that doesn't seem to be saying anything about a debate with regard to the benefits or advantages of, say, a wholly rational and perhaps even atheist viewpoint or worldview or perspective. It's not that type of film, because in fact we have characters that are, for instance, the character of Uma, and there is a very key moment where he is talking with his wife. And in fact, the idea of their marriage is something where he emphasizes that they are indeed man and wife because they were married, in his words, in a religious ceremony. And so there is this idea too of, and there are some moments where religion is this idea of faith and belief, giving a type of solace to characters, as it's expressed in, say, songs that are sung. One of which is, we understand, written by Satyajit Ray himself for purposes of the film. But the idea here is that it's not religion that's being attacked by this film, Satyajit Ray, because on the contrary, Ray provides also backdrop for showing us the great benefits of a kind of a sincere belief system, or sincere feeling of faith that can bring people together and that can really show a sense of positivity and bond, for instance, in the characters of Doya and Uma, respectively. And so remember, Uma, as the young man, he is being educated, but also he is relying on, say, this idea of belief in the strength of his bond with Doya, which is, as I say, based upon this religious ceremony of his marriage. And so this is, I think, a really nuanced way that this film is dealing with this idea. It is not suggesting anything in terms of an overall critique against religion writ large, as much as it is, say, a focus on the type of maybe the potential harms that can be had in terms of an intensified dogmatic, institutionalized view or application of religion, in terms of the external community pressures on the individual and psychological aspects of the individual. So this becomes, I think, a very nuanced and very delicate balance that is being struck by this film, Devi. And as I say, there are flourishes in it that are just, I would say, in terms of cinematic artistry, miraculous. I mentioned the dream sequence, which is very famous about this film. There's also a sense of animation, which is also mixed in with the close-ups of the face, of the visages of the performers here, the way that the landscape is shown, the way that nighttime settings are shown, the details in a particular moment of nighttime between Uma and Doya in particular. The Subhatra Mitra cinematography is highly celebrated, and this particular working relationship with Satyajit Ray is also something that's very celebrated, and it's so exemplified here in this particular work, and the way things are framed, and the way that the certain musical cues are embedded in as well. And the like, and so and then just the way that characters are engaging with the background, and it's just so rich and so filled with life and style and atmosphere and presence. Again, it's a type of cinematic miracle, and everything about it is compelling and thought-provoking and highly dramatically charged, and oh so unforgettable. This is the work from Satyajit Ray, which is DEVI. The Criterion Collection has released this film, DEVI, at spine number 1102, and what we have here is the Blu-ray edition of this release, and it's purported to be based on a new 4K digital restoration, and this is, I think, another brilliant presentation of this work, and it is so kind of crisp, and it feels very much alive, and I think that's so important too, because there are so many things about the way that shadows and light are interacting with the close-ups of faces and the eyes, and there's some pretty intense key moments, especially in the latter half of the film, where that becomes very well pronounced as one is watching this particular release. And so this is something that I hope that as many people will watch as possible, because it is really an extraordinary achievement, truly extraordinary. It's wonderful to get this particular Blu-ray from Criterion. So please, if you haven't seen this film, please check it out. Please check it out. It is really great. It's as I say, a type of, it's miraculous. It is really miraculous, and so it's absolutely fantastic that the Criterion Collection is releasing it in this form. As with Criterion's other releases, we also have a number of supplements as well, and so let's go over these that are included as part of this release. Now, I should say from the outset, on paper, it may look like the number of supplements is quite small. In fact, it is. We don't have that many supplements. We only have, in terms of the supplements that are included in the disc itself, we have a particular interview or set of interviews in one supplement, and then we have a type of video essay, and that's it, or that might seem to be it. And in terms of running time of each of these supplements, there's nothing that's, say, feature length or anything. So just this is my way of saying at the outset that on paper it might look like we are not getting that much in terms of supplements, in terms of the actual quantity, running time, and number of supplements, etc. However, please do not be disheartened by that particular look on paper, as it were, because when one actually watches these supplements, when one explores these supplements, one quickly realizes that all those minutes are filled with so much information and passion and spirit and love for the works of Ray and for this particular work, DEVI, in particular. And so I just want to really emphasize that the quality of the supplements is top notch. So just wanted to say that from the very outset. Now let's talk about those supplements specifically. The first is it's sort of interviews with the two with two actors from the film who play the main characters of the film. And so this is interviews with Sharmila Tagore and Soumitra Chatterjee. And this is described as being recorded by the Criterion Collection, recorded in 2013, but then put together for this particular release in 2021. Now, for those of you who know the Criterion Collection's release of the Apu trilogy, you will know that there is in that film, or in that particular set, the work Apur Sanchar. And as part of that release, Apur Sanchar, there's also an interview, or a series of interviews, or collection of interviews with these same actors who also appear in that film, and it's edited together for purposes of one of the supplements here. So now we have the same setup, essentially, and these same actors are now being interviewed for DEVI. So my understanding is this was probably recorded at the same recording session, and their comments that were recorded at that session are now being edited and placed as part of this supplement for DEVI. And so now their comments regarding DEVI are now part of this now newly released supplemental material. And so we are getting, once again, interview comments from Sharmila Tagore, who once again plays the character of Doya, and then Soumitra Chatterjee, who plays Uma. So this is the young couple of the film, and so this is one of the, or perhaps the core important dramatic relationship as portrayed by these two actors. And so they are being interviewed separately, but their interviews are edited together. Overall, it's 16 minutes. This is essential. This is absolutely essential. So what do I mean by this? So first of all, they each bring with them their own sort of sets of maybe experience with regard to the film and their work on the film and where they were in terms of their careers at the time. For instance, Sharmila Tagore mentions how she was, right, in terms of her experience, she was relatively inexperienced as far as where she was in her career and her life at the time when making. She was very young when this film was made, but she, of course, this was one of the early parts of her very celebrated career. And here she delivers this incredible performance. And she recalls or recollects working with Satyajit Ray, working with other actors, Soumitra Chatterjee, for instance, who plays her husband, or also working with the very famous Chobi Bishash, for example, etc. And so this is, she also mentions, with really great command over detail, she mentions the idea of the mother goddess. She mentions the idea of Devi and Durga, or Durga and Kali, and the idea of the idea of different incarnations. And I think that idea of different incarnations, or a positive incarnation spirit, and perhaps a more maybe benevolent or malevolent aspects of the same Shakti. This is, I think, exemplified, for instance, in the poster art that was conceived by Satyajit Ray and is forming the basis, for instance, the Criterion Collection cover art release, with the split down the middle, one side of the face being darkened, the other side of the face being lightened. And this might be representative of the different incarnations of the mother goddess herself, Durga, Kali, etc. So, and now we have Doya, who may or may not be one of those incarnations, and that is, of course, the face of the character that we see here. And so here we have Sharmila Tagore's her comments about this particular aspect, about how this was a critique, a really angry critique by Satyajit Ray, not against religion, but against the Hindu orthodoxy, and that's her words, and the idea of rational reformism coming into play in the latter half of the 19th century. And this is coming into conflict with the Hindu orthodoxy. And this is exemplified very directly in the film, in the patriarchal relationship between the elderly father figure, Kali Kinkar, and also the younger generation, included in which, of course, is Uma and Doya. And also, speaking of the character of Doya, which is the character that she plays, she talks about how perhaps her predicament in terms of the increased sense of isolation and the psychological desolation that her character is just being confronted with, this idea of how this is affecting her, but also paralleling that, the idea of the intense fervor of the belief systems that are represented by the Kali Kinkar character, and also the community that come to visit her when they believe that she is another incarnation of the mother goddess. And so this, in the words of Sharmila Tagore, is Satyajit Ray's way of expressing this idea of perhaps, in her words, mental derangement or blind faith superstition leading to very extreme circumstances in the context of this story. And this is a very important concept. Again, just leading to the specific aspects of life and death that are at the very heart of the film, especially when you get to the latter half. So, and she also talks too about the tragic nature of the love story, and this is also a love story. This is also a melodrama. This is a type of drama between a couple and the in-laws, as it were. So this is also a very important aspect to this as well. And also the very close relationship that her character has with the nephew, the young boy, Koka, and how this is actually another key relationship that is directly affected by the externalities of the particular situation, the religious fervor that is happening on the outside, but is also having its effects on the inside. And one of the ways it's having its effects on the inside, the interior of the household, is in the way it affects the relationship between this young woman and her nephew or nephew-in-law, the Koka boy character, etc. So this is, I think, a very key development when it comes to this particular film. And so Sharmila Tagore's comments here are really quite brilliant and very compelling. We also have comments from Soumitra Chatterjee, who of course plays the character of Uma, and he expresses, or he talks to about, in such a brilliant way, about the almost political driving nature of this film, and Satyajit Ray's attempts at really creating a very highly charged, again, angry film that is focusing in its sort of vitriol against this particular outlook on institutionalized orthodoxy and the real human consequences and human toll that an extreme take of this might have on the spirit and the psyche, again exemplified by the character of the elderly father figure patriarch and what the effects that relationship has on the young woman Doya. Speaking of which, something emerges in this set of interviews that is so fascinating, which is how this film is really subject to so many possible interpretations. One of those sources of possibility of interpretation comes in the form of how one is to interpret the relationship between the elderly fatherly figure, the patriarch figure, the Kali Kinkar figure on the one hand, and then the young woman, Doya, on the other, the daughter-in-law and the father-in-law. Now, a lot of commentary, including the comments that are going to be made in the second supplement that we'll talk about momentarily, and a lot of the scholarship and all of the reviews of this work seem to cite or interpret this relationship as being perhaps there might be some kind of sexual-based fixation that the elderly father figure has on the young woman, the young bride, the young daughter-in-law. And this thus leads to his fascination that becomes perhaps unhealthy, and that unhealthy fascination is manifest in this particular dream sequence, which leads him to believe in this almost deranged fervor way that she is indeed the human incarnation of the mother goddess. So, could that mean, therefore, that that is a consequence of some kind of unhealthy sexual fascination that he has for his daughter-in-law? Some readings perhaps suggest yes, and there's a particular scene that happens prior to the dream sequence early on in the film involving the young woman massaging the feet of the patriarch figure, head of the household, and how in this moment he is also explaining his viewpoint about his family and his family life, which may or may not be hinting at this type of sexual fixation that he may or may not have, depending on one's interpretation. And so I bring this up too because in this set of interviews with the actors, for example, Soumitra Chatterjee actually expresses a similar viewpoint or a similar interpretation. However, very, very interestingly, Sharmila Tagore, who again plays Doya, the young woman, she acknowledges that perhaps there were these readings that were made by a number of people who watched the film, a number of people who reviewed the film. But she admits in this particular interview that she doesn't necessarily share that particular view. And in fact, from her viewpoint, she saw the father figure as being not necessarily having some kind of maybe unhealthy or maybe perverted sexual fixation on the young woman character, but rather his character stood in as a type of maybe father. Well, he was a fatherly figure in the sense that he was her father-in-law, but also a fatherly figure in the sense of a type of innocent position, almost as a type of avuncular innocent position. Totally without any type of perverse sexual fixation. And so that is a very interesting way in which this set of interviews goes, because we're actually getting in almost real time differing interpretations on a real key concept or real key relationship, because depending on how one interprets it, one could therefore see the fundamental line with how and why the fatherly figure ends up believing what it is he believes, and what is the root cause of this particular dream to begin with. So I think therein lies a whole range of possibilities, again, depending on how one interprets this as an example. And we get different interpretations within the same supplement of the Criterion Collection release. So that is brilliant, 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 brilliant. And so this, I think, this is, I think, really powerful and very astute and very insightful set of interviews. Again, edited together, 16 minutes, but 16 minutes, I was watching this and I was fascinated and I was in awe, and I was watching it and rewatching it again. It just was so packed, filled with information and insight. So please check it out if you can. This is the set of interviews with Sharmila Tagore and Soumitra Chatterjee, again, by the Criterion Collection, approximately 16 minutes. Please check it out if you can. But that's not all, because the second of the supplements that's included with the release of DEVI is called A Goddess in Close-Up, Satyajit Ray's DEVI. And this is a video essay by Professor Meheli Sen. This is approximately 17 minutes, 17. So again, maybe on paper it doesn't look to be a long supplement in terms of running time. However, I do want to emphasize again that this is packed filled with information. And this is yet another brilliant, brilliant supplement. I was watching this and I was just pausing it every maybe 30 seconds or so, because within the space of a minute, there were so many things that I was just trying to note down and to try to assess and try to understand. So much information is provided here, and it's presented in such a great way by Professor Sen in this video essay. So again, I really, really hope that you get a chance to watch these supplements, including this video essay, because it is brilliant. One of the best of the year in my view. Professor Sen talks about the key concepts of the film DEVI, and I tried to touch upon them in this video discussion, but anything that I say will be totally without substance. And so if you're looking for a discussion that has full, robust substance and then some, please check out this video essay by Professor Sen. It's brilliant. She does an absolutely brilliant job in discussing, for instance, what are perceived to be some of the key concepts of this film in terms of an attempt of reading the film. And those key concepts being, for example, as they're expressed here. the idea of the cult of the mother goddess, in the words of Satyajit Ray. And this is, I think, explored in terms of the fervor of the community, the approach of the father, and how he interprets his particular dream, and how he is willing to take this particular belief to a very extreme end, even where the consequences end up being potentially quite dire indeed. So there's this idea of the cult of the mother goddess, Devi, and this idea of Shakti, Durga, Kali, the incarnations, and the like. So, and I think this is having to do with the orthodoxy and the dogmatism and the institutionalized approach to religion, rather than the actual critique against religion itself. And so this is a key difference. But that's one theme that is at play here that Professor Sen mentions. Another theme, too, is the idea of the emergence of this idea of the educated class, the Renaissance of 19th century India, the latter half of the 19th century. The rise of rationalism, etc., and how this might come into conflict with sort of traditional wealth-based or landed-based wealth feudal class, as expressed in this particular family unit, right, and expressed in the patriarchal system, the patriarch and the vis-a-vis the younger generation within the household itself. And then how this, as I mentioned, affects the Hindu orthodoxy. And we see this played out quite brilliantly and quite dramatically in the specific relationships between father and son, not just, of course, between Uma and his father, but also we hear the story about Uma's friend and the idea of total disinheritance if you were to ever marry a widow, which is considered taboo from the older generation's perspective. So, but the issue with the son is that he cannot break free so easily, because he is relying quite heavily on the wealth of the patriarch and the older generation family wealth. So there is that complexity that is at play here. There's a conflict, but also there's a kind of dependence that is outwardly acknowledged as well. So this is, I think, an example of that. So there's that. Also, there's the position of gender roles, as expressed, for instance, in the way in which Doya is her role, or what her role seems to be, or what we as viewers might perceive her role to be as this young bride. And this is, again, vis-a-vis her father-in-law, but also vis-a-vis her husband. And this brings, I think, a very interesting, nuanced detail, which is brought up by Professor Sen here, and also brought up a little bit in the essay, etc., which is a type of maybe a type of complexity, which is, I think, showing a real depth of maybe depth of sort of intellectual maturity in the film that is quite brilliant and very insightful. Now, I mentioned earlier this type of conflict between the emerging, educated class, the younger generation that seems to be representing a type of emergence or rise or wave of rationalism and modernism, or the idea of modern thinking, quote unquote, that seems to be on a collision course with the wealthy landed class, the feudal class. So, but what this brings with it, we assume, therefore, is this idea of a type of modernity of spirit, and also the individual free will that is often linked in political terms and societal terms with the rise and emergence of democratic thought, or principles of democracy. And parts of those principles of democracy include the role of women, and the role of women in the context of independence and free will and free choice and freedom of thought and rights, etc. So the independence and the relationship that has with gender roles. So on the one hand, therefore, it might seem that Uma's position as part of this quote-unquote younger generation that is being educated in the city, this might suggest that maybe he would therefore easily represent, as a type of metaphor, maybe the individual and equality that also is applied to gender roles. Therefore, there might be a sense of individualism and equality that would be applied in his way in which he treats his wife Doya, which would therefore be in contrast with how she seems to be treated in the rural household, with the patriarch elderly father figure at the head. So that might seem to be the way in which this film might deal with yet another angle of this particular, say, conflict between younger generation and older generation. But what this film does is very, very interesting and very, very complex in that particular context. It doesn't quite do that. It instead actually has a moment where although there's a type of devotion that the husband shows towards his wife, there's also the sense of maybe the Doya is actually expressing or showing a type of subservience to her husband. And therefore, the gender roles, even in the context of the emergence of the younger generation classes exemplified and represented by this, Uma's story, the gender roles might not necessarily be reaping the benefits of any type of direct, maybe allegiance or application to democratic-based thought, at least in the context of societal values and gender roles. And so there is this type of paradox that is going on in terms of what things are happening and emerging, and what that represents on the one hand, but how that is affecting or perhaps not affecting what one might otherwise expect in terms of the roles of men and women in society and how they relate to each other, and how that is expressed or not expressed in the relationship that Doya has with her father-in-law, and also in how that is expressed in the relationship that she has with her husband Uma. So there is this maybe a really delicate and subtle nuance in this conversation that it's beyond my comprehension, because I'm not at all a student or an expert when it comes to this aspect of history. But this is something that is touched upon with I think great delicate balance by Professor Sen in this particular video essay. So that's another great example of why this is so great. And also another thing too, and I mentioned, is sort of the relationship, the generational relationships, father and son relationships, parents and children, and how parents or children are trying to maybe rebel or become independent from their families, and yet at the same time, due to financial situations, they are perhaps unable to do so. And so therein lies even further sources of conflict and tension, but that conflict and tension might always have to give way when it comes to the financial realities of the situation. So therein lies another sense of nuance and complexity that is at the heart, or one of the hearts, of this brilliant, brilliant film, as identified by Professor Sen in this great video essay. And she goes into other details too about examples of this idea of social transformation on the one hand, but also maybe a lack of social transformation in certain key aspects, again as exemplified in specific plot points of this film, DEVI. And then she goes into detail too about the specific images, religious icon images that we sometimes encounter in the film, sometimes at the beginning, sometimes at the end, the sort of statue images of the incarnations, various incarnations, the relationships, the importance and role of Shakti, Durga, Kali, the benevolent form of the mother goddess, and then also maybe the more malevolent form, etc., and what that might represent, or type of difference in terms of different aspects of perspective and philosophy that are ultimately tied with the human condition. And how that type of viewpoint too is also linked, perhaps in an either sincere way or perhaps in a perverse way, how it's linked to the plot developments and what the viewpoint is of Doya and what it is people believe she is in terms of another incarnation of the mother goddess spirit. So for these and other reasons, and also there's a related to the character of Doya, Professor Sen speaks to in this great way about the language that is employed in the film, and the way in which Doya, the character, the young woman, is referred to as Ma, And therefore the idea that there's the mother role or the mother figure, and that is also linked with how there is or there isn't actually the mother role that is in this particular household, and perhaps it is the emergence of the character of Doya that has somehow rekindled this feeling within the elderly patriarch head of the household with regard to this. But that then leads to the discussion, or returns the discussion of whether or not there is a type of sexual fixation that the father figure has towards the daughter-in-law. That is, I think, another something that we've mentioned earlier. But this idea, going back to the general use of the idea of ma and the way in which she is described oftentimes as ma, this also might be seen as a type of foreshadowing with how she will therefore be really directly linked with another mother figure, that being the mother goddess. And so there is a type of foreshadowing that also might be a sense of irony, as well as a sense of sincere way of how she is truly viewed, because she is also viewed, the character of Doya, she is viewed with a sense of love and welcome. And this is, I think, exemplified in that tender, warm relationship that Doya has with the young boy, the nephew. So it's delicate, it's an explanation on language, and it is very, I think, filled with a lot of great analytical detail, but it's also filled with, or it doesn't ever lose sight of the fact that this is a very humanist story. And these are aspects that are dealing with characters that have these human impulses and these psychological and emotional impulses that I think can be understood by all. And I think Professor Sen does such a great job in this and other examples throughout this video essay in showing us the history, the social context, and also the context of Satyajit Ray, what he was trying to do, and what themes were really important when watching a film like DEVI. Professor Sen also reminds us in this essay that, relatively speaking, maybe not that much scholarship has been published or written about this particular work. And so if that's truly the case, then hopefully a film like, sort of release like this by the Criterion Collection with the supplements, etc., will pave the way for more or inspire more scholarship and film criticism and reviews to be made about this particular release, because it is stunning. And Professor Sen's comments here, as well as the comments by Sumitra Chatterjee and Sharmila Tagore in the earlier supplement as well, I think are combined to create this wonderful discussion of this wonderful work, DEVI. So that is the discussion of the supplements. So again, I just want to encourage one to check them out. Again, on paper, it might not look like a lot, but believe me, there is a lot going on in these supplements. So you won't be disappointed. I promise you won't be disappointed. Now, going to another aspect of this release is the booklet, or the leaflet here, which is the fold-out type. I should say that the fold-out type this time is on a kind of a thicker type of paper print than what I'm usually used to with other Criterion releases of this kind. And so I'm very impressed actually with this different, slightly thicker type of paper. So well done, Criterion, for doing that. I'm still not a fan of the fold-out type, but at least there is this sort of thicker paper which has a bit of a more robust quality to it. So I like that. And also there is a great essay, Devika Girish, Seeing and Believing. And I mentioned the Professor Sen video essay, but this essay too is a great complement to that, and it adds more discussion. It adds yet another voice to the discussion as well, and details that are so relevant. There's a detail here that I wasn't aware of. For instance, the fatherly figure, the patriarch figure, his name again is Kalikinkar, and according to the essay, Kalikinkar is, the name literally translates as, quote, devotee of Kali. And so understanding this, assuming this, right, based on this, one can really see how this character really represents this idea of the religious orthodoxy. And so, and what that means in terms of what his dream was. And perhaps that might have something to do with an interpretation of how, say, he views his daughter-in-law, etc., etc. So there's that detail, which is, again, a great example of how great this essay is. And also the essay focuses focuses in on some details, for instance, of the underlying story, the Mukhopadhyay story, which is set in the 1790s, but then we understand, based on this essay and also the Sen video essay, that Satyajit Ray wanted to take the story setting and change it for the film version, change it to the latter half of the 19th century, and that purpose was to tie it with the rise of a sort of the intellectual renaissance of that particular period. And so this is a very key component. So that it becomes a really interesting exercise in examination of the exercise of adaptation of a literary work into film. And this is also represented in really great degree in the video essay. It's represented in a really great degree in this essay, Seeing and Believing, as well. So for these and other reasons, this essay is another stellar one. One of the best I've read this year. Please check it out if you can. Once again, once you've seen the film, first see the film and then you can read the essay and get a lot out of it, and hopefully read it many times, because it is really worth it. And I should mention too as well that, as I mentioned before, this cover art design is described as being based on original poster artwork by Satyajit Ray himself. And so it's great to have this reference back to that, and it's also carried through in the leaflet here. And as I surmised in an earlier comment in this video, this type of split might seem to be type of psychological split, the clash between certain sides of society, certain generations, but also the different faces of the mother goddess, again is exemplified in the one face of the Doya character. And this is also mirroring a particular key moment in the dream sequence, as well as being a close-up of one of the key characters. So well done to Criterion for using this as a great inspiration for the great cover art design. And it's overall stunning, absolutely stunning. So there is that as well, the presentation of the design of the release itself for the Criterion release of this great Satyajit Ray film, DEVI. So, my dear friends, that is this particular release. I do want to say that this is one of, from my point of view, this is one of my favorite releases of the year. This is really up there. I was thrilled when this was announced, and when it arrived, I watched it immediately, and I was so stunned. I was overwhelmed with emotion upon its finish, and I was so compelled that I was stunned. I had to give myself some time to breathe and to process. And then after I had enough time, I watched it again, and then I watched it again, and then I absorbed the supplements. And there's so many things that I don't understand. I admit I don't understand, but I will keep trying to understand further. But on the basis of on the small portion of what I am able to understand based on my very limited intellectual capabilities, I can still feel the power of this film, and the power compels me to want to experience it more, to learn more, to understand more about what it is saying, its context, its history, the history that it's speaking about, etc. And it just draws me in every single time. And I look forward to my continuing relationship with this film, because it continues to teach me, it continues to bring me in and to shock me and to really move me, and it becomes this overwhelming, emotional, compelling experience from the great Satyajit Ray. This is the work from 1960, DEVI. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now, and so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I very much appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.